World War II is often framed as a clash of ideologies, a battle between democracy and tyranny, good and evil. But history is rarely that simple. The greatest conflict in human history didn't ignite with a single gunshot. It wasn't sparked overnight by a few radical speeches. It started silently. In the ledgers of central banks, in the corridors of stock exchanges, and in the empty pockets of the common man. Long before the first Panzer crossed the border, the global system was already in a state of terminal collapse. We are taught that nationalism and revenge drove the world to the brink, and while those emotions were real, they were merely the symptoms. The disease was systemic. Behind every flag there is an economy. Behind every ideology there is a currency. And when the money fails, the social contract dissolves. To understand why the world went to war, we must stop looking at the battlefield and start following the money. Our story begins in 1919. The war to end all wars had finished, but the peace was nothing more than a delayed death warrant. The Treaty of Versailles didn't just redraw the map of Europe, it effectively amputated the German economy. Germany was stripped of its coal-rich territories, its merchant fleet, and its dignity. But the true blow was the reparations clause. The victors demanded astronomical sums. We aren't talking about symbolic payments. We are talking about a debt designed to keep a nation in perpetual servitude for generations. The math was impossible. Germany's industrial heartland was occupied, its resources were constrained, yet the bills kept coming. It was a classic debt trap set on a global scale. In 1923, the German government reached a breaking point. With no way to pay, they did what desperate regimes always do. They printed. At first it was a trickle, then it became a flood. Prices didn't just rise, they disintegrated. This was the birth of hyperinflation. By the height of the crisis, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Workers were paid twice a day, rushing to spend their wages before they became worthless during their lunch break. People carried cash in wheelbarrows, not because they were rich, but because the paper was worth more as fuel than as currency. But the real tragedy wasn't the loss of wealth. It was the death of trust. Money is a shared hallucination. It only works if we all believe it has value. In Germany, that belief vanished. When a population loses its stability, it doesn't just lose its money, it loses its soul. It becomes desperate. And a desperate population is a dangerous one. For a brief moment in the mid-1920s, there was hope. The United States stepped in with the Dawes Plan, providing massive loans to stabilize Germany. It was an era of artificial prosperity, the Golden Twenties. But this recovery was built on sand. Germany was now on life support, and the oxygen was being supplied by Wall Street. 1929. The music stopped. The Wall Street crash didn't just hurt America. It sent a shockwave that shattered the global economy. As American banks collapsed, they called in their international loans. In Germany, the life support was ripped away. Factories shuttered. Banks locked their doors. By 1932, 6 million Germans were unemployed. Hunger became the primary political force. When the system fails to provide bread, people stop caring about democracy. They start looking for a savior, no matter how radical. The rise of the Nazi Party was not an accident of history. It was an economic calculation. Their slogan wasn't complex political theory, it was simple. Arbeit und Brot, work and bread. To a man who hasn't fed his children in 3 days, a radical dictator offering a job is more persuasive than a moderate politician offering a speech. Once in power, the new regime performed what looked like an economic miracle. They built the Autobahn. They modernized the military. Unemployment vanished. But how? They used a shadowy financial instrument called MEFO bills. It was essentially a massive, off-the-book shell game. They were paying for their recovery with money they didn't have, betting everything on a future that didn't exist. By 1936, the miracle was hitting a wall. Germany was a manufacturing powerhouse, but it lacked the one thing a powerhouse needs: raw materials, iron, grain, and above all, oil. The regime pursued a policy of autarky, economic self-sufficiency. But the more they tried to be self-sufficient, the more they realized it was impossible within their own borders. Here is the uncomfortable truth. By the late 1930s, the German economy was so over-leveraged, so bloated by military spending, that it had only 2 choices: total collapse or total conquest. War was no longer a political choice. It was a business model. To keep the factories running, they needed the iron of France. To keep the people fed, they needed the grain of Ukraine. To keep the tanks moving, they needed the oil of the Caucasus. Germany wasn't alone in this desperate scramble. Japan, lacking its own natural resources, was expanding into Asia for the same reason. Britain and France were fighting to protect their colonial trade routes. The world wasn't just divided by isms. It was divided by access. Access to energy, access to food, and access to markets. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, it wasn't just the start of a military campaign. It was the bursting of an economic bubble. The German treasury was empty. The gold reserves were gone. The only way to stay solvent was to plunder the wealth of other nations. War had become the ultimate act of predatory accounting. So, why did World War II start? It started because the post-WWI economic system was built on debt and humiliation. It started because the Great Depression broke the back of global trade. It started because when systems fail, the voices of reason are drowned out by the drums of war. Conflict is not an accident, it is a consequence. History teaches us that the stability of our world is only as strong as the stability of our currency. When the money dies, the peace usually dies with it. If you want to understand the modern world, don't just look at the headlines. Look at the balance sheets, because power always starts in the wallet and history is written in gold before it is written in blood. This is capital, history and power. If you found this insight valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that truly run our world.